Okay, Introduction to Sociology class. Welcome to doing the course at home. Thank you, COVID. All right, we're going to start with Chapter 7. Now, some of this may be a repeat of where we left off, but I'm going to do Chapter 7 in two different video parts. So you want to pay attention and see if I can explain some of these concepts and hopefully make all of this a little easier as we do this course online. So Chapter 7 starts off, it's social stratification. Again, we sociologists love to make up new words. Can't just say the word layer, even though that's all that stratification means. Again, society comes in layers. Rich, middle class, working class, layers of ethnicity, layers of gender. Weber, ding, 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 dead German guy, going to be important, came up with the term life chances to try to help explain the significance of social stratification. So what did he mean by life chances? Housing, healthcare, education, all of these create or take away life chances for the people that experience them. So it can be as subtle as if you come from the wrong side of the town and you list that on your resume and nobody wants to hire you because you're from the bad side of town, to something more straightforward, as in, if you come from Harvard or Yale, chances are you'll always be in charge. We look at those schools differently than we look at other programs, even when we shouldn't. So the rich that can afford to send their kids to those programs, they're basically helping ensure that they're going to do well. So there's social mobility. Here in the United States, we really like social mobility. We like to talk about it, how everyone can always get rich if you just work hard. And we do have a lot of that in this country, probably more so than other places. But remember, the mythos that all the rich people that you know were once, rags to riches and they were poor guys at one time isn't true. Most of the wealth in this country is inherited. It's not made. Two concepts, again, very difficult to remember on test day. Inter, I-N-T-E-R, generational mobility, that's between you and your parents. And intra-generational mobility, which occurs within your own lifetime. Again, intergenerational mobility, my generation is the one first predicted to do worse than their parents. We're very excited about that. Intragenerational mobility within your own lifetime, I hope you all get a chance to experience positive mobility. But as we know, what goes up, sadly, can go down. Systems of stratification, the most extreme, of course, being slavery, actually owning another person. We focus a lot on slavery here in the United States. It was a terrible system. I think at times white privilege is built on two aspects that we don't ever talk about, which is, gee, if you could steal somebody's land and get away with it and then steal somebody's labor and get away with it, do you think you could make yourself wealthy? Probably so. And so the Europeans that came to America stole the land from Native Americans and then stole 200 years worth of free labor from African slaves that were brought here. We seem to think that slavery has disappeared. That's not true. Sadly, I wish it was true. But slavery, particularly for the sex industry, is alive and well and extremely profitable. And we here in the West, particularly the United States, are often the destination country for that slavery even till today. There's also the caste system. We always associate this with India, which has a very elaborate caste system. And the idea is you're born into a caste, and no matter what happens next, you're always going to be forever in that caste. And that you're always treated that way. Another way of thinking of caste could be apartheid in South Africa, or even the Jim Crow system in the United States, that no matter what those folks accomplished, they were always thought of as less than. Here in the United States, we've got the class system, which is based on what you own and the money that you earn. And we are divided in society in ways that sometimes we're not even aware of. Where you grew up, the subdivision, if you grew up in a subdivision, the houses were probably all within, they're all $150,000 to $200,000 houses. Chances are there weren't $1 million houses on your block if your house was worth $150,000. So without thinking about it, we've been already class divided from a very early age, where the people that we knew in our neighborhood were all roughly from the same class as we were. And that has an impact on us. We see the world often through very similar lenses based on our class position. So, of course, we're going to talk about class, going to talk about Karl Marx. Ding, 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 ding. Another dead German guy. All right, we love Karl. Let's talk about Karl Marx. Again, not a sociologist, a political economist who's trying to figure out why the world was the way it was, why human society was the way it was. So he came up with the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, if you've ever used the term bougie. You've already been influenced by Karl Marx, even though it's not what he meant. The bourgeoisie were not just rich people, they were people that owned the factories, owned what he called the means of production. So we're talking about Henry Fords and Carnegies and Vanderbilts, and George Eastmans, those kinds of people. And then there was the working class, which was everybody else who had to sell your labor to the capitalist, the bourgeoisie, to get by. And his special name for that was the proletariat. He said that eventually a feeling of estrangement and powerlessness would grow within the working class. He called this alienation, in which you don't own anything at work. Your work dictates to you what desks to sit at, what tools to use, how to use them. Where if you were, let's say, a blacksmith, you would get to decide your own tools, own your own tools, decide how much you make a horseshoe for. This feeling would grow, and this discontent would lead to what he considered class conflict. And that this conflict would basically be able to be found all throughout society, because he said society's superstructure, the culture, if you will, that the institutions that our society participates in would be permeated with this class structure, such that art would continue to celebrate and reify the system, and schools would reify the system, and churches would reify the system, which I think you can find today. I mean, say you don't believe in capitalism, and people look at you like you're insane, which is kind of funny because it's not the only system there is. You'd probably have an easier time saying that you don't believe in Christianity than you would saying you're not a believer in capitalism. It so permeates our system that, again, you were in school, you had a course in economics when you were in a Texas high school. Chances are it was all about capitalism. You probably spent less than a day talking about socialism, even though everything you're wearing right now is probably made in China. So how did that happen? Well, that's the superstructure. That's the capitalists controlling all the elements of culture to make the system feel good and look good for them. But again, Karl predicts a day when that would end up being different. Class conflict, eventually the working class would not be content. The intelligentsia, the smart people, that's actually all of us smart people, would lead the workers forward to take control of society. We'll see if that happens. Max Weber, again with the same dead German guy, Max Weber. He's having a conversation with Karl. Again, a bit one-sided. Karl's been dead. But Weber's saying, hey, listen, I like what you're saying. Owners, workers, I get that. But there's another nuance in society that you're missing. And so he came up with power, prestige, and property, or as your book says, wealth, prestige, and property, and power. So wealth and property are sort of interchangeable in that one. The idea being adding the concept of prestige or status is important because not everybody does things based strictly on earning the most money. Lots of people choose occupations and ideas because of the perception of prestige. Again, college professors, not paid very well, considered very prestigious. Garbage truck drivers, not considered prestigious, actually make more money than college professors. So power, prestige, and property is translated modernly to what's called socioeconomic status, SES. Make a special note of that. Probably going to see it on the test. And how does that work? Again, we do surveys to find out the most significant jobs people think that are the most status. So like doctors and lawyers are always at the top, and janitors and custodians are always at the bottom. Certain cultures also look at the whole wealth, power, prestige thing a little differently. So some places you can have power and wealth and property, but necessarily not prestige. So for instance, the Yakuza in Japan is an accepted part of society. They have a certain level of power. They have a certain level of wealth that they get for trading in things that society says you shouldn't have, but they're not considered very prestigious and are considered sort of, undesirable. So the Weberian model goes even farther to include this little ladder thing on page 199 if you have the 11th edition. It starts with the upper class, the lower upper class, the upper middle class, the working class, the working poor, the underclass. Make sure that you know those. And we have what I'll start calling the magic word. Every lecture I'm going to include a magic word, and I'm going to ask the magic word on a test to see if people are viewing this video, and it'll be a nonsense word, and today's word is something memorable. Monkey pus. Yeah, I can remember that. Monkey pus. That's our magic word. But moving on, we want to know the percentages. So the upper class is 0.5%. The lower upper class, 0.5%. So we're still 1% of society. But the really, really wealthy people, not media figures that we think are wealthy, but the really, really wealthy people, most of the time we don't have any idea what their names are because they don't want to be known that way. We tend to know media figures as the lower upper class. Then there's the upper middle class. These are big managerial positions, presidents, vice presidents, regional vice president kind of things in big corporations. The middle class, which is 30%, and only 30%. You ask most Americans, they always say that they're middle class. Most of the time, they're not. Because the working class, the working poor, and the underclass are 55% of America. But we tend to not think that way because of our cultural messaging that says as long as you have a big screen TV, you're probably middle class. Within the working class, I want you to pay attention to a term called the pink collar occupation. These are lower income jobs, usually low paying, that are done primarily by women, which are cashiers and receptionists and secretaries and stuff like that. One pink collar job that is well paying is nursing, but even they'll tell you for what they do, they don't make as much as those that like doctors who are still primarily male. Paying attention to the underclass as well. Read that little section. So the Marxian structure of owners and workers gets a little bit of a facelift with a guy named Eric Olin Wright. He puts in small business owners and another group called the managerial class. That's kind of important since most owners don't show up to their factory and crack the whip on the worker. They actually leave that to the managerial class, which are sort of trained attack dogs. Even though they can be fired, they punch a time clock just like anybody else. Anyway, so that's our first lecture. Hope you enjoyed it and look for part 2.